Okay, hello everybody. Could we get ourselves organized for the next panel here? Our next panel is going to look at nature in practice, and we're going to have some practitioners. We're very, very pleased to have that. And our moderator then is a distinguished professor of geography and the von Humboldt Chair in Geography, my friend and colleague Eric Sheppard.
Thank you, Glenn. Good afternoon, everybody. Before we get started with the panelists, the Jon Muir Research Group have a small investiture they might like to make on Glenn. So I'll ask you guys to come up here and do that.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. We have all presentations. Okay. Can you put the presentation? I'm here today. My name is Julie Loisel, and I'm one of Glenn's postdocs in the Muir Lab group. And with me today, I have PhD candidates Katie Glover, Kate Willis, Marcus Thompson, Lauren Brown, Scott Lydon, Satari Najat, and James Holmquist is on his way. There he is. Great. We are here today to honor the great leadership and wisdom of our mentor, Glenn MacDonald. And there he is. And we would like to welcome you as well to come in front.
Yeah, I had no idea that they were so.
And for the record, we roasted him yesterday. So if he looks a little concerned, it's because he really does not know what I'm about to say.
You see the screen?
So here is, first of all, you can see that Glenn and Jon Muir might have a few resemblances. Before we get started, I would like to tell Glenn, if you would look at me, that we are very, very thankful for your time and a little bit of your money and the many, many opportunities that you provide us with. But what we are truly grateful of is for you taking the time to listen to us every week. All of us, we look fairly smart maybe right now and nice, but I can swear to you, we are a handful. And every week we walk in the library, we walk and we sit around the table and Glenn talks to each and every one of us, listens with honesty and genuine interest in what we have to say. He really helps us figure out our issues, and he has thoughtful ideas for us, and we are so thankful for that. We are also very thankful for believing in us and inspiring us in the way you are as a leader and a visionary, but also as a scholar and as a very warm man. It's very great to work with you.
Thank you, Julie.
Okay, second phase. Jon Muir was an inspirational man and a passionate one as well, very much like you and very much like a lot of people in this room, I believe. And what I want to say...
Do you want us to advance slides at all?
Yeah, sure. We have a few photos of Glenn in the field with us, and so we thought you guys would appreciate that. We believe that Jon Muir's legacy is something that we should and must build on and actualize, no matter what your position is, whether it means to rethink our definition of nature and wilderness, or maybe even reassess our position on conservation. It doesn't matter. We still need to take these building blocks and actualize them, make them more modern. And we think that Glenn, of all the people we know, would be an excellent person to take on that great challenge that is to actualize Jon Muir's legacy. And in fact, we are hoping that with your contribution, including forming new scientists and also helping to gather a lot of people from the scholar world, but also from society, that your contributions will become legacy, and maybe in 100 years, I don't know if you will be a controversial person or not, but I hope people will still be talking about that. Okay, so now I believe maybe Katie would like to, or Kate would like to present you with a little something.
I'll just cut to the chase. So yesterday, this mini roast was mentioned. We found a Sierra Club quiz online that basically assessed your Muir similarity index. And We walked Glenn through some of the questions. The beard was mentioned. We think because he claims he had a beard at one time in his youth, he got credit for that question.
My wife can verify that.
All right.
It didn't look very good either.
Ultimately, we came up with a score of 22 out of 25 questions, I think. And of Sierra Club's categories, you're officially Muir's twin, according to their highest rating category. But the one question that Glenn missed was, at the end we asked whether or not he had an honorary degree from another university, and he said no to that. So we would like to rectify that by giving you today, from our ad hoc committee for the assessment of Muirness, we would like to present you with this diploma. As a disclaimer, this is not officially sanctioned by the UC Regents, by the way. This is just a bit of fun from a lab group that very much admires you and wanted to have a bit of fun at the same time. All right.
I have a kind of a wall of shame with a bunch of various awards. This will have a place of honor. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry that they ate into your time. I'll reprimand them later.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
We're done.
Thank you. Eric.
Thank you. You can see what a special relationship Glenn has with his students. It's great to see. So this third panel this afternoon is titled Nature in Practice. We have 4 speakers, 2 of which contributed essays to the issue of Boom that's available to you outside. I'll just introduce them to you. David Szmanski is the superintendent of the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area from the National Park Service, and he has 4 years of experience with the NPS. Peter Algoma is Associate Professor of History, Geography, and Environmental Studies at UC Santa Barbara and author of the book After the Grizzly, Endangered Species and the Politics of Place in California. Jon Christensen, who you met this morning, is Assistant Professor in the Institute for Environment and Sustainability, the Department of History, and the Center for Digital Humanities, and the editor of Boom, not just this issue, but all of the issues. And Jared Dahl Aldern is a historical ecologist, ecological restorationist, and educator who's taught Native American history at San Diego State, Stanford, and other institutions, and currently teaches science at the Fresno Academy for Civic and Entrepreneurial Leadership. So, David, do you want to begin?
So good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I think we uploaded the wrong presentation. Well, thanks. I can do it without the slides. Well, thanks for having me here. One of the things I wanted to talk about was the history of the National Park Service over the last 100 years. Jon Muir was one of the individuals who was instrumental in creating the movement for national parks. And so it might be worthwhile to look at where the National Park Service has been in practice. Here, let me. Yeah, could you go to the drive? Oh, that's the one that comes up. Yeah. Oh well. Well, the slideshow will be irrelevant. It's for a presentation that I gave on urban parks. But nonetheless, let's just jump into the presentation. Where is the National Park Service? You know, in 1916, when the National Park Service was created, most of the parks were located out west. A number of them had been created by Congress, but most had been created by presidential proclamation using the Antiquities Act. I had some really nice maps to show you that. As the Park Service matured, and really almost starting in 1917, we moved east and into the Midwest. We experimented with different ideas: seashores, history, memorials, and urban recreation. And you would see, if you could see the map, sort of the parking of America, or at least the national parking of America over that time. In the period since 1980, after the creation of the Alaska Parks through presidential proclamation, you would find the parks that have been created by Congress are smaller. They almost are exclusively created in partnership. Both their creation and their operation depended very closely on partnerships with local communities and local agencies. They're closer to people. And they also, I think, were created in tandem with what I call the rise of local conservation. I think here in Los Angeles, you've seen a lot of it through Proposition A, which was passed in 1994, and the second generation of Proposition A in 1996. Those and similar efforts have happened across the country, and I think as Glenn said during his opening presentation, it is true. The federal government is not purchasing much land anymore or creating large parks. We are looking to see how we can partner with local organizations to do good things. Well, people, specifically visitors and employees. In 1916, parks were primarily for the wealthy. You had to be wealthy and you had to have leisure time to get to them. Going to parks was an excursion. In 1966, which was about 50 years in, they were something, and it was a very self-conscious effort on our part to make them for the working family, mostly white working families. In both of those circumstances, 1916 and 1966, people came to us. Today, we realize that nurturing relationships with urban people, young people, and people who by virtue of circumstance, location, or awareness might not know about or have access to their public places is really essential. They come to us, we go to them, and sometimes we meet at a third location. We try to make them us and to learn from them. One of the things that we focus on at Santa Monica Mountains, we hire between 30 and 35 youth each year, high school and college. We've been doing the program for about 14 years. We right now are reaching the point where some of those folks are superintendents themselves and managers. But we have a long way to go. We don't really look any more like the face of America than we did in 1979. So even though we're having success here in Los Angeles, that success is not reflected service-wide. Well, communication. Like, how do we talk about parks and what kind of stories do we tell? In 1916, it was the guided excursion. Folks were usually in wool suits, tramping up the mountainside. In 1966, campfires, guided tours, walks, largely by travel by automobile. We had signs and panels. One of my fellow panel members wrote in his Boom article that the classic National Park Service narrative starts somewhere in the depths of evolutionary time and ends with benevolent bureaucratic management. And that almost brought me to, I was laughing with tears in my eyes in my office after I read that, because at our least creative, that might be true. It's definitely true. Well, today we need to focus on fresh and engaging versus static messaging, and I had some wonderful examples of graphic design. We have 2 graphic designers on staff. Communication is extremely important. We use the tools. 10 years ago, we were talking about innovating in our use of technology, and I would say all we need to do is we just need to catch up with where the rest of society is. We need to use those tools effectively in social and digital media, graphics, trailheads. There are changes. Trailheads are our new visitor centers. That's where people have their encounter with us. Festivals and events have replaced scheduled programs. And one of the things that I had presented is something that it was a photograph of a program at Fort McHenry in Baltimore, where kids had been given the story of the War of 1812, and they created their own play and produced it. So they were, they were looking into history and interpreting it themselves. And I think that kind of interactive experience is something that we aim for more and more. I think the future is exciting. There's lots of work to do. Change is inevitable. The way I do think with people such as Jon Muir, those traditions can be traced to a very specific lineage, a very specific line of thought from people with very specific experiences. I don't know if the question whether they're relevant today is really even the right one. I do think we need a new set of experiences and thoughts. You know, we need to constantly be refreshing and reinvigorating the way that we experience the outdoors. I think for the National Park Service, you know, our aim is to become a democratic institution that includes and serves all Americans, and that really is our aim. But thank you for your time.
So our second speaker is Peter Algoma.
Great. So first of all, I just want to begin by saying thank you. Thank you to the organizers of this meeting. Thank you to Boom. And congratulations to Glenn. This is a great honor, one certainly richly deserved, and also a big name to live up to, especially without a beard. So I want to begin with a question. So who here has been to the Channel Islands? Okay, great, most of you. Okay, now let's forget about Catalina. Who here has been to the Northern Channel Islands? Okay, many of you, great. How about Santa Cruz Island? A lot of you, fantastic. And how about all the way to the west end, the remote west end of Santa Cruz Island? Oh, all the way out to San Miguel. Okay, great, fantastic. All 8, who said all 8? Fantastic, you're the winner. You are definitely the winner. You beat me, that's for sure. Great. So for the few of you who have been out to these places, you might recognize scenes such as this. This is a short video that I captured on a recent trip last spring out to Santa Cruz Island. I'm going to allow it to play on a loop during my talk, which means you'll see it roughly 16 times over the next 6 or 8 minutes. And then I'll return to it at the end to explain why I think it's actually interesting and important other than just pretty. So over the past several years, I've had an opportunity to become increasingly familiar with the Northern Channel Islands. And it turns out that they're just an absolutely wonderful place to ask the kind of questions that increasingly I'm interested in and are occupying the center of my work. How have people from different disciplines, cultures, periods, and regions understood changes in the environments around them? And how do those ideas shape policy and management for lands and natural resources? Now, I say that the Channel Islands are a wonderful place to reflect on these questions and to think with nature in California, as was the theme of the Boom special issue, in part because they're filled with all sorts of wonderful, delicious contradictions involving people's understanding of the past and their relationships to it. So consider this short list. The Channel Islands contain some of the most remote places in the American West, yet on a clear day they are visible to millions of people. They're considered a global hotspot of biological diversity, but like most islands, they contain far fewer species than just about any area of similar size on the nearest continental mainland. They're connected to the Santa Monica Mountains by a range of peaks so grand in stature that it dips below the surface of the sea. Ecosystems are, of course, profoundly shaped by their climate, and the Channel Islands' climate is both remarkably damp and remarkably arid. The Northern Channel Islands contain some of the oldest human remains in North America, yet today they only have a handful of permanent human residents. The islands are mostly public land, but they are mostly inaccessible to the vast majority of the public. Their largest terrestrial predator is also the world's smallest canid, and that's the island fox. Yet the single creature that probably best captures the conundrums of the Channel Islands is its most famous prehistoric resident, the fanciful, oxymoronic pygmy mammoth. Now the list could go on and on, but there's another paradox of the Channel Islands that I think is directly relevant to Jon Muir's legacy and to the theme of thinking with nature in California that provided the prompt for this work. How should we talk about, think about, interact with, and manage a place such as the Channel Islands, which has such a long and complex human history and a rich and unique natural history? So what I want to do now is just read a little bit from the beginning of my piece, and then I'm going to take the final few minutes and talk about why this video is interesting. There are few better places in California to think with nature than the blustery earthen prow of Fraser Point at the northwest tip of Santa Cruz Island. On a clear day, the point offers a magnificent 360-degree panorama. Behind you lie the island's arid windward slopes. To your right, sheer headlands overlook the Santa Barbara Channel and distant Santa Ynez Mountains. On your left is Santa Cruz Island's rugged western shore with its sea cliffs, tide pools, and guano-caked rocks. Directly in front of you, across a 6-mile strait, Santa Rosa Island's sand dunes shimmer in the afternoon sun, out there. And far beyond, the hazy double-humped apparition of San Miguel Island hovers just over the horizon, perched on the edge of a wild Pacific. Standing on Fraser Point, teeth to the gale and hardly a hint of humans in sight, it is tempting to indulge in the fantasy of time travel. Superficially, this place recalls a bygone era in California when people were fewer and nature was still wild. The fact that Santa Cruz is an island, requiring an hour-and-a-half ferry ride to reach it, adds to its sense of apartness, as if the channel crossing were a voyage to another age. Yet this place is no relic. Santa Cruz Island is the product of a long and complicated history, the clues of which are everywhere for those willing to look. Gazing south from Fraser Point, massive shell mounds mark the locations of ancient Chumash villages, now recognized as some of the richest archaeological sites in North America. A mat of squat-tan foliage, including a cornucopia of native and exotic plants, carpets the foothills. Deeply incised arroyos recall decades of foraging by feral animals, and a maze of rutted dirt roads, long maintained by the U.S. military, traverse steep mountainsides. Near the end of the visible shoreline, Christie Ranch's historic buildings once served as a remote outpost for the island's livestock operations, and now provide simple facilities for visiting researchers. How should one study, interpret, and manage an island known worldwide for both its natural and cultural histories? This is one of the most important questions, I think, facing parks and reserves in the 21st century. Santa Cruz Island just happens to provide an excellent example. It provides an ideal vantage from which to view the intersection of nature and culture in California, how our state's institutions interpret, represent, and mobilize history, and how their approaches to remembering the past and documenting change over time bear on the present. 3 institutions, the National Park Service, the Nature Conservancy, and the University of California's Natural Reserve System, serve as Santa Cruz Island's custodians. Along with a handful of mainland cultural organizations, they also serve as the de facto guardians of the island's history. Each has developed its own relationship with the past, and these relationships inform the ways that each studies, manages, and interprets the island. Each has a different origin, mission, and culture, and each embraces a particular kind of institutional memory, and each engages in its own form of organized amnesia. The way these institutions remember and act on Santa Cruz Island's past will shape its future and perhaps the futures of other special places in California and beyond. So I'm writing about the way that institutions use history, they interpret history, and they mobilize it for management. The reason I think that this image is particularly evocative and interesting is because it's got a fascinating context. Okay, so in this trip, I was out there with a bunch of students and folks from out of town. We drive along this rutted dirt road between Christie Ranch and Fraser Point, and we get to this marine terrace, and we come to a stop because there's this amazing field going on for acres and acres and acres of these wonderful little purple flowers. For those of you with a botanical inclination, you'll recognize these as blue dicks, which are a common wildflower in the American West that looks like it should be related to the onions, but it's actually kind of, it's in the asparagus family. And it's not particularly unusual, even on a dry year. But what's interesting about this is that this is the first time anyone had ever seen a display like this on Santa Cruz Island. And that includes the University of California's reserve manager, Linda Lofgren, who has been out there for 50 years on Santa Cruz Island. And he's surprisingly not weird. Really nice guy. He has a beard. Okay. The island is undergoing dramatic changes as a result of land use, climate change, and restoration efforts, including the elimination of thousands of feral animals over the last several decades. But there are all these questions when you see something like this for the very first time. Were the blue dicks always there in the past and just mowed down by feral animals before they flowered? Are they colonizing new habitats that were made available either through the actions of those feral animals or through restoration activities that have eliminated so many of them in the years since? Or is there some other explanation, and will they continue to appear like this in the future, in this really unprecedented way? I can't answer all of these questions, but what I can say is that this scene is neither natural, as John Muir might have imagined it, and as some of the agencies involved in managing Santa Cruz Island imagine it, nor is it cultural, as many of my colleagues in the environmental humanities and social sciences often frame it. Both of these framings, natural and cultural, are beside the point. It's historical. This display of blue dicks is a product of a long and complex and unique history. That may seem obvious to many of you in the audience, but we still have a long way to go, I think, to figure out what this fundamental insight about the historicity of these environments means for how people talk about and care for places like Santa Cruz Island.
So our third speaker is Jon Christensen.
So we see Boom's role and mission to provoke, inspire, begin, and sustain important conversations that open up between our great universities and the public and the media. And I always tell our writers to imagine that they've brought together a dozen of their friends for a dinner party conversation, and their friends from academia, from the media, maybe an old high school friend who's in town, somebody from down the street, a scientist, an engineer. And we're all having the same passionate conversation about the things that we care most about. And it's one of those great times when the conversation really rises and everybody is sharing their thoughts. And you know, and we don't necessarily all agree with each other, but we hear each other out and we're respectful of each other and share that kind of passion for what we care about. When we did our first issue of Boom that we brought here to UCLA on the 100th anniversary of the Los Angeles Aqueduct and tried to change that conversation from looking backward to looking to the next 100 years of water in LA, I got a note from Richard White, whose opinions I deeply respect, and he gave me the great compliment of saying that he had read it cover to cover and really liked what we were doing with it, but he told me he didn't agree with everything in it. And I wrote back to say, I don't agree with everything I publish, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I want to thank Glenn again for bringing us together, and my colleagues here who have shared their thoughts and shared their ideas with us in Boom and here today, and done so very bravely, I think, and I'm very, very grateful for that. For those of you who are not following on social media, and Rue, please put your phone down. I'm now officially a moron. And I got a voicemail just a little bit a while ago from a very exercised, sounds like an elderly gentleman who told me that he had talked to lots of people today, and they all agreed they're not going to let me destroy the planet. So I just want to reassure you of that. And I thought, you know, from moron to Godzilla in under 60 seconds, that's not bad, you know. But enough about me. Let's talk about you. So I want to share something on this topic about practice. This image that you see here is some work that I did over the last year with a data visualization and design studio where I'm now a partner up in San Francisco called Stamen Design. We had a kind of research and development project that we called parks.stamen.com. And this is a map of all of the Instagram photos in parks in the Los Angeles area this year so far. And it was very, very cool because we developed these really cool algorithms for capturing different kinds of social media. And for the wonks in the audience, each social media has a different API, so you have to use different geographical algorithms to capture all of those things. But those are photographs that people are posting in parks in the Los Angeles area. So we use the geographic space to capture social media that is coming out of those spaces that has geographic tags on it. The tagline that we used was stories pour out of our parks every day. We're here to listen. And we looked at Instagram, Flickr, Twitter, and Foursquare check-ins. Like I said, it's an experiment. It's at parks.stamen.com. And you can look at all of the parks and public lands in California by their geographic area, by which ones have the most tweets, which ones have the most Instagram, which have the most Flickr. Here's Griffith Park. Here's Tilden Regional Park in Northern California. Here's Yosemite. Here's some of the Twitter. And what we discovered is that parks are social. That people do things, they express themselves through social media in parks, just like they do in the rest of their lives, and sometimes they share too much information, especially on Twitter. Much less so in photographs, actually. Very rarely do we see anything that's, disturbing or offensive in the photographs, although we often do in the Twitter. So we've kind of moved away from that. Of displaying that, but you can see it here. And when I described this project to a deputy director at the National Park Service in Washington, D.C. Earlier this fall, and the Park Service is working on a rebranding to reach young, millennial, urban audiences, diverse Americans. And she said, yeah, that's what we've been talking about. It's like people are having a party over here, and they're talking about us, and we're not going to the party. We're not participating in the party. And there's something very, very powerful in this realization that parks are already social. It means that we don't have to gin it up. We don't have to make parks social. They're already social. People are already sharing things about their experiences in parks with their friends and their family and the whole world. We don't have to make that up. We need to figure out how to participate in that conversation. The other thing that we saw, and you can't see this too close up. So I'm now working with a group called the Resource Legacy Fund and Parks Forward Commission, and we're building an app for people to find parks based on the activities that they like to do, and also these kinds of stories that are told on social media, to connect to this younger generation and connect them to parks. And one of the things that the Parks Forward Commission found in research that they commissioned is one of the barriers to people going to parks in California, particularly young, millennial, Latino demographic, is that they don't think that they'll see people like themselves in parks. And as you no doubt know by now, I think that is in part a legacy of John Muir, not entirely John Muir, of course, but that's the kind of legacy that I think we, that we should be concerned about, and concerned about finding ways to tell these new stories. And what you see if you look at this on social media is that diverse Californians will see themselves in parks. They are in parks. They're taking pictures of themselves. They're taking pictures of each other. They're taking pictures of themselves in the landscape. And so what we're trying to do is build a constituency, an engagement with a new generation for the future of parks in California. That millennial, urban, socially adept, technologically connected, increasingly Latino demographic that here in California will decide the next 3 governors, that nationally will decide the next 3 presidents, that in recent years have been responsible for the major environmental initiatives and bonds that have passed locally and statewide. And we want to do this, as I said earlier, by meeting people where they are, by asking the question, what do you think about parks and nature? What do you care about parks and nature? What do you like to do in parks and nature? Who do you like to do it with? And listen. Thank you.
So final speaker is Jared Aldern.
Thank you. Hi, yes, I'm Jared Aldern, and my article in Boom is about the history of grizzly bears in San Diego County. And it travels from a place called Los Vallecitos, which was the site of the death of the last grizzly bear known to live in San Diego County, and winds up in Lost Valley which is several miles inland. Los Vallecitos is over by the coast, and several miles inland is this remote valley called Lost Valley. And there's a story, a Cupeño Indian story about the resurrection of a grizzly bear, where it ends up. So my article is about the history of bears in San Diego County, but more broadly, it's about indigenous narrative stories and about taking those stories seriously as historical sources of information. And information that can be put into practice, possibly. So, let's see. PCs, I'm used to a Mac. Okay, I think I have it. So indigenous narrative as historical source. And Richard White has written that historians have always done a kind of literary analysis in our work as historians. We often read for an author's voice in a document, for how a document is composed, in addition to reading simply for its content, for what it says about events in history. And I have this word parataxis up here because parataxis is something that I've encountered in indigenous narratives as I've read them and heard them. The idea of parataxis, it's a way of stringing sentences together, or rather it's like a row of beads, one sentence after another, without the connecting string between them. So it's a narrative style. Karl Krober's example that he gave one time is where some might tend to say, when the weather gets cold, bears hibernate. An indigenous story might say something like, the bears sleep, it snows. And so there's a sequence there where the listener or the reader is expected to put the connections together, the causal threads in the story. And Theodor Adorno, the theorist, philosopher, did a lot of work on parataxis in various art forms, and he came up with the idea of constellations of pieces of art, of stories, for instance. So it's the same idea of, an analogy to stars in the sky. We are the ones who see the patterns among the stars, so in reading indigenous narrative, it may be one story after another, with no connecting thread except the patterns that we see between them. So the information that are in indigenous narratives are not easily or rapidly gained. You have to listen to and read stories in the entire repertoire of a tribe's oral tradition, for instance, and read these stories repeatedly. And then you'll start to see some of the patterns emerge in the stories about animals in the land that, or the meanings about animals in the land that are emerging. And then there's simply literal interpretation, and this is where I go in the Boom article. And in particular, I take seriously the notion that humans could transform into bears, and vice versa. And so I thought, well, what if I just take this as fact, and we'll see where we go with this. The anthropologist Deborah Dozier a few years ago interviewed the Cahuilla elder Alvino Siva, and he said the only way that you can believe that humans can turn into bears is if you are an Indian. So I'm not an American Indian person, I'm not a Native American, but what I'm trying to do is figure out what are the practical implications of a view such as this, if you take this literally. Well, one of the reasons that we humans see ourselves as closely related to bears sometimes, so closely related that we are blood relatives or can transform one into the other, is that we end up in the same places and we're interested in the same resources, like acorns, for instance, or fish. Or it could be honey, and I relate a few stories about bears getting into trouble with white settlers eventually because they were raiding farms and were really interested in the food that the farmers and ranchers had intended for other customers. So it led rather rapidly to a decline in the bear's population. The stories really, I realize, describe a landscape where bears and humans can interact. So they're after the same resources, and they also describe a landscape where humans see bears and bears can see humans. It's a landscape that has been opened with fire. And so it's not a landscape that's completely covered, untouched with dense chaparral, for instance. So on the left here, we have a map of San Diego County by the ecologist from San Diego State, George Cox, and these are historical grasslands in the county. And on the right are Kumeyaay Indian place names. If I can get Chuck Striplin or one of my friends from the San Francisco Estuary Institute or someone with some GIS expertise sometime, maybe we can overlay these. But I would make the case that there's significant overlap between grasslands and places that are important, that are mentioned in stories, and that therefore there's some history in these place names and stories having to do with fire history, because that's what creates grasslands. You have to carefully tend the land and tend resources within grasslands to create this landscape. Okay, so the stories describe a landscape now lost where bears and humans could interact, a land carefully tended with fire, not a hands-off landscape. That landscape did not exist before settlers, the untouched landscape did not exist, or it didn't exist to the extent of covering an area like San Diego County, for instance. Indigenous stories are, in fact, the only human-produced documents that we have from the deep past in this area. And they describe a network of relationships in a carefully tended landscape. Every once in a while, most recently, the Center for Biological Diversity proposed to reintroduce grizzly bears to California. And my thinking is that if we restore the landscape and prepare ourselves spiritually and intellectually, maybe through careful listening to and reading of stories, could the bears return on their own? So in other words, if we build it, will they come? Yeah. That's it.
My thanks to all four speakers. It's really thought-provoking interventions. Is this working? Yeah. The things which it provokes me to think about are, first of all, the naturalness and inevitability of moving beyond the notion of nature as out there and us as in here. It's certainly a myth today, even if we could find vestiges of it still in Jon Muir's times, a point that Jon reminds us of. And that nature is neither social nor natural, or kind of the cultural nor natural, as Peter puts it, but they are socio-natural assemblages that take distinctive forms in different places and have their own historical trajectories, as Peter puts it. And that, as Jared's essay brings out, perhaps better than his presentation does, there's an emotional relationship between us and nature, which particularly plays out, I think, in terms of our relationships to animals, because in some sense they're closer natural beings to ourselves than some others. So then this raises questions about how to bring these different kinds of experiences that we have of this thing that we call nature together, different cultural and class and gendered relationships to different conceptions of nature, a challenge that David identified as one the National Park Service is certainly facing, and that the stories of Native Americans that Jared talked about really exemplify. And to do this in a way which brings these into a productive conversation with one another, one that doesn't necessarily lead to some straightforward solution as to how we should handle our relationship with nature. And so the question that this sort of brings me to pose to the panel, but I'm not going to have them answer it, I want them to listen to your questions too, is what does this mean in terms of contrasting and ethical positions in terms of our relationship and ethics? How do we bring ethics into these conversations? Because there's no practice without ethics either implicitly or explicitly guiding it. And very different and contrasting ethical positions that circulate around every one of our high-profile engagements with nature, including the one Jon has been having with his Twitter fans today. Okay, but enough of me. Please put your hands up if you have questions. I have a microphone here.
Well, I got all exercised this morning in the LA Times by the conception that presentism had taken over the idea in your comment. But then it occurred to me that there's one way in which the comment Muir's legacy has to go might be entirely appropriate, and that is if you think that we would have been better off had Muir not existed. And I wondered if you did.
No, you know, I'm a historian who doesn't mind being presentist in the sense that I think we do history for the present and the future. That's why we write our histories and talk about them and think about them. But I do also, you know, but I'm not presentist in the sense that I do deeply believe the past is a foreign country, and people do things differently there. That's why we go there, to try to understand the different possibilities of human experience, of human actions. You know, I think it's easy, you know, all too easy. I've been a journalist for 30 years too, and been on both sides of the camera and the microphone and the notepad, and you know, realize how these things can be simplified. And that one too was in the LA Times meant to provoke a debate, and it sure has. You know, but so I would not say that we would be better off had Muir not been here. I appreciate that history. I appreciate, you know, I appreciate all that has developed from that. I think what I'm saying is that now I don't think that that legacy is very useful to us. And that, you know, I think we need, as David so eloquently said, you know, new stories. And I think that's, you know, that's where we, you know, where I say, I mean, to, you know, for many of us, you know, particularly older white guys like me, you know, we need to listen. We need to listen to hear those stories. Those stories might not be our stories. You know, I love, you know, I get, you know, I have, you know, ecstatic experiences in the wilderness myself. So, you know, I'm not denying, you know, those things or those experiences, but I am saying there are a lot of diversity of experiences that we need to listen to. And I would just add to this question about ethics, the idea of politics. And to, you know, and that politics is the way that we work these things out. And if we continue to see, you know, decisions in California made by 17% of the voters, you know, our parks and public lands and water and air are not going to be in very good shape.
So I'm not sure who this is a question for. And I think it touches on the ethics issue. So we have the Santa Monica Mountains National Park or National Recreation Area, both. And we have a so-so healthy population of mountain lions that occur within sometimes our city limits. We used to have grizzly bears. They were another great predator. We could bring them back. And we have different cultural views on experiences with wildlife and interactions with wildlife. You know, I personally would love to have snakes back along the LA River, but I have a feeling many of the neighborhoods that the river goes through might not share my enthusiasm for that, even for harmless snakes. And the question is, who gets to decide? Who gets to decide if we should have lions in Griffith Park, which we do right now? Who gets to decide if we should bring grizzly bears back? And whose decision is that? Is it the neighborhoods? Is it the ecologists? Is it the administrators?
You know, Beth will be on the next panel. And,
It'll be Beth Pratt who decides.
Yeah. I think I can. You know, I think it's a big question, and in each of those, you're assuming. I think there are two questions. There are decisions, but who has influence over what happens? So an individual could kill a single mountain lion, and then all of a sudden there is no you've reduced the population significantly, at least as male mountain lions in the Santa Monica Mountains. So there is individual agency, but I don't. Pat, I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I would love to say that we have the authority and the power to do our job to preserve certain things unimpaired. But the truth of the matter is we depend on communities and to be honest, who have oftentimes provided wonderful support in the form of, I think we all have to do it together, which sounds hokey, but.
Yeah, but I mean, I would also just, I would, add in the agency of the animals, right? I mean, it was P22 who decided to show up in Griffith Park. You know, nobody decided to, as far as I know, put him there, and maybe, as Jared said, you build it and they'll come back, right? I mean, we've got gray wolves in the Grand Canyon. They may, we had one in Northern California.
Well, you got built.
Yeah, and I think increasingly we're doing that to some degree.
I'll take this opportunity just to slip in a comment that I meant to mention in my talk, which is that if you want to restore a landscape, like I had the two maps, if you want to do something like bring some of those grasslands back, it's extremely important to work with tribes. So that because the stories are, their texts about the historical state of that landscape are current. And so and they have concurrent jurisdiction with national parks. And so especially on a federal level, it's important to constantly consult with tribes and consult appropriately.
I think of Lewis McAdams, who said, when we'll know that the LA River restoration has been successful when steelhead trout come back.
Yeah. Next question.
Okay, I think it's a question I have sort of for everybody, and including other panelists, but I'll put it to you, John. And that is that so much of what I've heard today is that the future is going to lie in getting observational data out of very diverse sources, whether it's from Native Americans or it's from park goers or it's from Asian tourists or whatever it is. It seems to me that many of the solutions are not going to be language-based solutions. They're going to be on the understanding that's somewhere else than just language. It seems to me that a lot of what we have to learn is going to have to come from data gathered in a picture form, in a visual form. How do you go about interpreting and collecting that data effectively?
Yeah, that's a really good question that I think we're exploring now and using all the tools, you know, that we can. I mean, we're beginning, you know, we're talking with some, you know, groups about doing some presentations of this kind of visual data of people who will be affected by sea level rise from climate change. And so we can use those same algorithms to detect, you know, to harvest social media photographs that are you know, coming out of areas in California and around the United States and soon around the world, you know, that are where there will be, within 40 to 50 years, annual flooding that is unprecedented. You know, we won't see inundation all the time, but we are going to see coastal areas that are going to experience annual flooding, you know, that is unprecedented. And that's going to be experienced by people who are alive today. People who are 40 years and younger, statistically, are going to be alive in 2040 and 2050 in those places, and they're going to experience it. And we can look at the social life of those places now and understand that and begin to communicate and tell stories about that. I think, you know, so you know, one of the things we're beginning to do is explore the use of facial recognition software, for example, to, you know, detect photos that have people in them versus just landscapes and things like this. So I think we're really at the beginning of a very, very exciting time. And I had a couple of slides that I wanted to show of, you know, urban population growth around the world, you know, where the urban population is going to double on this planet in the next 40 to 50 years. That means the built environment is going to double. How that happens is really going to fundamentally determine how people live with nature and with each other. And those are going to happen in densely connected, very dense media sharing, mobile data, and all of that. And I think we're right in the middle of learning what that whole world is about and what it means for thinking about nature.
And one thing I'd add to that is that no matter how much information we collect, no matter how much science we do, that doesn't resolve the questions, that doesn't lead to the decisions, because these are always moral relationships, and there are contested practical ethical positions around every one of them, and it's through engaging across those that we can at least get a sense of what the trade-offs are from various kinds of relationships to nature, and never pick the right one, but at least be wiser about the consequences of what we end up deciding to do. I'll take this as the last question. Glenn gets the last question.
So I want to flip Brad's question on its head. Who gets to decide what we're eradicating, especially if we're talking about quote-unquote native versus non-native species, and if a non-native species is the only nature that a certain community is getting to interact with, then how can we say that's really bad?
I think Peter should answer this question since he studied Santa Cruz Island.
Santa Cruz Island is an unrepresentative example. So the case on Santa Cruz is that it's an island, right? And so it's a place that's sort of a relatively controlled environment where there are a few agencies that could actually approach this issue, right? And so over the last few decades, there's been a huge effort to eradicate non-native species, to attempt to restore the island. A lot of it is restoring to kind of an imagined past, in part because we don't really know and things have changed so much since then. But this is an extraordinarily bizarre example in many ways, and I don't think it applies very broadly, which is why some of the claims about success there, although we need to give credit to the good work that's been done there, sort of ring hollow in terms of being examples that we could follow in other places. Having said that, I mean, I think that, you know, the way it seems to me that in our society, the way we make decisions is often very ad hoc, right? And it certainly, I guess, my perspective as a historian is that if you look back, you know, things happen in a really weird way. Why are there mountain lions in Griffith Park? You know, why are there mountain lions anywhere? Well, there's a long history of predator control. There's the 1990 proposition. There's all these different things that have led up to what we do now. I wrote a piece for Boom a few years ago that was could be read as a preface to your discussion of the Mojave. I was talking about the emergence of renewable energy there. And one of the points I kind of made, if I can try to connect these, is that when we get caught up in these kinds of questions, we often resort to debates, technical debates about compliance, right? Instead of a broader debate about what are these places for, right? What do we want out of these places? And in order to answer that question, you have to define the we. And so the question of ethics also becomes a question of justice in terms of who can participate. Because justice isn't just about outcomes, it's about procedure. So I just successfully did not answer your question.